High above the English countryside, on November 13, 1943, a young American pilot faced an impossible choice. As his damaged B-17 bombers spiraled out of control, Second Lieutenant Clyde "Sparky" Cosper had mere seconds to decide: save himself or risk everything to protect others. This is the extraordinary true story of a 21-year-old pilot from Dodge City, Texas, whose final act of courage saved his entire crew and countless civilians below. His split-second decision to remain at the controls of his failing aircraft instead of parachuting to safety would earn him the Silver Star, Distinguished Flying Cross, Air Medal, and Purple Heart, all awarded posthumously. As we explore Cosper's heroic sacrifice, we'll also discover how his story represents the best of the human spirit during humanity's darkest hour. His actions remind us that even in war, individual choices to prioritize others over self can illuminate the shadows of conflict. The story begins on a cold November morning in 1943. World War II had been raging for 4 years, and the Allied forces were locked in a brutal struggle against Nazi Germany. The skies over Europe had become a deadly battleground where young men fought and died thousands of feet above the earth. Among these airmen was Clyde "Sparky" Cosper, a Texan who had enlisted in the military on October 16, 1939, before America officially entered the war. His path to becoming a pilot wasn't direct. He first served as a gunner on a bomber based in Puerto Rico after completing his initial training at Kelly Field in San Antonio. Cosper's dedication and natural abilities caught the attention of his superiors. In April 1941, he returned to the United States to begin flight training. On February 16, 1943, his persistence paid off when he received his wings and warrant as a flight officer at Blackland Army Field in Waco, Texas. By November 1943, Cosper was serving with the 367th Bombardment Squadron, 306th Bombardment Group of the 8th Air Force in England. He was one of thousands of American airmen stationed in Britain, flying dangerous missions over Nazi-occupied Europe nearly every day when weather permitted. The B-17 Flying Fortress that Cosper piloted was a marvel of American engineering. With a wingspan of more than 100 feet and 4 powerful engines, these bombers were designed to deliver devastating payloads to enemy targets while defending themselves against fighter attacks with multiple machine gun positions. Cosper had named his B-17 Miriam in honor of his mother. Like many pilots, this personal touch helped forge a connection between home and the deadly skies over Europe. It was common for aircrews to develop deep bonds with their aircraft, seeing them almost as living entities with personalities and quirks. November 13, 1943 began like many other mission days.
Cosper and his crew received their orders. They would be part of a massive bombing raid targeting Bremen, Germany, an important industrial center and port city that supported the Nazi war machine. The weather that day was concerning. Heavy cloud cover and turbulence were predicted, but the Allied commanders determined that the mission was critical enough to proceed despite the challenging conditions. Dozens of B-17s were prepared for the dangerous journey over the English Channel and into German airspace. As Cosper and his crew boarded the Miriam, they went through their usual pre-flight routines. They checked their equipment, adjusted their oxygen masks, and settled into their positions. The plane carried not just its crew, but a full payload of bombs destined for German factories. Shortly after takeoff from their base in England, the mission was recalled due to deteriorating weather conditions. It was a routine decision made to protect the bomber force from unnecessary risk.
The B-17s began turning back toward their bases, and pilots likely felt a mix of relief and frustration. For Cosper and his crew, however, the return flight would become anything but routine. As they flew through thick clouds on their way back to base, B-17 #4231038 encountered severe turbulence. The massive aircraft was suddenly caught in violently shifting air currents that threatened to tear it apart. The plane was thrown into a terrifying spin. Cosper fought the controls as the B-17 plummeted several thousand feet in altitude. The centrifugal force pinned the crew to their stations, while loose equipment tumbled around the interior of the aircraft. Everyone aboard knew they were in grave danger. Using all his skill and strength, Cosper managed to regain control of the aircraft momentarily. the bomber leveled off enough for him to issue a critical order to his crew: bail out. The situation was dire, and the experienced pilot knew the aircraft might not remain stable for long. 5 crewmen immediately followed their commander's order, strapping on parachutes and jumping into the void. They would land safely in the English countryside, their lives saved by Cosper's quick thinking and piloting skills. But before the remaining crew members could exit, disaster struck again. The B-17 suddenly went into another uncontrollable spin, dropping rapidly to an altitude of just 1,000 feet. At this dangerously low height, the chances of surviving a parachute jump diminished significantly. The aircraft was spiraling toward the Earth with increasing speed. Once again, Cosper demonstrated extraordinary flying ability. Despite the nearly unmanageable aircraft, he somehow wrestled the controls and managed to stabilize the bomber just enough for the remaining crew members to bail out safely. All 9 of his crew members were now clear of the doomed aircraft. But Cosper remained at the controls. At just 1,000 feet of altitude, with a fully laden bomber carrying a deadly cargo of bombs, he faced an impossible decision. His parachute hung nearby, offering a chance at survival. All he needed to do was clip it on, make his way to the exit, and jump. Instead, he made a choice that defined the highest ideals of duty and sacrifice. Looking down, Cosper could see the town of Prince's Risborough below. If he abandoned the aircraft now, the B-17 would almost certainly crash into the populated area, potentially killing dozens of civilians. Though we can never know his exact thoughts in those final moments, his actions speak volumes. Cosper chose to remain at the controls, guiding the failing bomber away from the town and toward an empty field where it wouldn't endanger innocent lives. Witnesses on the ground later reported seeing the B-17 veering away from Prince's Risborough, its engine straining as it limped toward a clearing. The pilot's intentions were clear to those watching. He was deliberately steering the bomber away from homes and businesses. Cosper found a small clearing away from the town and attempted an emergency landing. Given the aircraft's damaged state, the bombs it carried, and the low altitude, he likely knew his chances of survival were minimal. Yet he proceeded with the crash landing to spare the lives of those below. The B-17 hit the ground hard in a field near Longwick. Upon impact, the aircraft immediately burst into flames as its fuel tanks ruptured. Seconds later, the bombs detonated in a massive explosion that destroyed the bomber entirely. Clyde "Sparky" Cosper perished instantly in the blast. News of the crash quickly spread throughout the region. For the people of Prince's Risborough, it soon became clear that a young American pilot had sacrificed his own life to save theirs. The story of Cosper's heroism began to take shape as witnesses recounted what they had seen. Meanwhile, the crew members who had parachuted to safety were recovered by British authorities and returned to their base. They shared the details of their harrowing experience and their commander's extraordinary actions. Without Cosper's skill and selflessness, none of them would have survived. On January 13, 1944, in recognition of his gallantry, headquarters of the 8th Air Force issued General Orders No. 10, posthumously awarding 2nd Lieutenant Cosper the Silver Star. The citation described his actions in detail, emphasizing his courage, flying skill, and devotion to duty. In addition to the Silver Star, Cosper was posthumously awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Medal, and the Purple Heart. These honors recognized not only his final act of heroism, but also his previous service, including a bombing mission over Germany on November 13, 1943. Back in Texas, Cosper's mother, Mrs. T.H. Gray, received notification in December 1943 that her son had been killed in a plane crash in the line of duty in England. The news devastated the family, including Cosper's brother, Thomas Moss Cosper, who was serving in the Pacific Theater. The full extent of Clyde Cosper's heroism only became clear to his family months later, when they received his posthumous awards and read the citations describing his final mission. The young man who had left Dodge City to serve his country had become a symbol of the highest ideals of service and sacrifice. To understand the significance of Cosper's actions, we need to appreciate the context of aerial warfare during World War II. The bomber crews of the Allied Air Forces faced some of the most dangerous conditions of any serviceman during the conflict. The statistics tell a grim story. Bomber command crews in the Royal Air Force suffered a casualty rate of nearly 50%. In the U.S., 8th Air Force, based in England, more than 26,000 airmen were killed in combat. The average bomber crewman had only a 1 in 4 chance of completing a full tour of duty, 25 to 30 missions, without being killed, wounded, or captured. Flying in the B-17 was particularly hazardous. Although nicknamed the Flying Fortress for its defensive armament, these aircraft were vulnerable to enemy fighters and anti-aircraft fire. They flew at altitudes where temperatures reached 40 degrees below zero, and oxygen was so thin that crewmen required masks to breathe. The physical conditions were brutal. The unpressurized cabins meant that at 25,000 feet, any exposed skin could freeze in seconds. The noise from 4 massive engines made communication difficult even through intercom systems. And the constant threat of enemy attack kept crews in a state of sustained stress. Yet, thousands of young men like Cosper volunteered for this duty. They came from cities, towns, and farms across America, many never having traveled far from home before joining the military. Their average age was just 22, making them one of the youngest groups of servicemen in the American forces. What motivated these young airmen to face such extreme danger? For many, it was a simple sense of duty. They believed in the cause of defeating Nazi tyranny and were willing to risk everything to contribute to that goal. Others were drawn by the challenge and prestige of flying. Whatever their initial motivations, bomber crews quickly developed a strong sense of mutual responsibility. In the confined space of a B-17, each man's life depended on every other crewman doing his job. This interdependence fostered deep bonds that transcended ordinary friendship. Pilots like Cosper bore a particular burden of responsibility. Not only were they tasked with flying complex aircraft through hostile skies, but they also felt personally responsible for the lives of their crew members. This sense of duty often led to extraordinary acts of courage when circumstances turned dire. Cosper's decision to remain with his aircraft rather than save himself reflects this ethic of responsibility. As the aircraft commander, he likely felt that his duty extended to protecting not only his crew, but also the civilians on the ground who might be endangered by his uncontrolled bomber. His actions also demonstrate the quick decision-making required of combat pilots. In the span of perhaps 2 minutes, Cosper had to regain control of a spiraling aircraft, order his crew to bail out, stabilize the plane again after another spin, ensure the remaining crew could jump, and then make the fateful decision to stay with the aircraft to guide it away from populated areas. This combination of technical skill and moral courage exemplifies the best qualities of the Army Air Forces during World War II. While many heroic actions occurred in the skies over Europe, Cosper's sacrifice stands out for its clarity of purpose and complete disregard for personal safety in favor of others. The impact of Cosper's heroism extended beyond saving his crew and the townspeople of Prince's Risborough. His story became part of the broader narrative of American sacrifice during the war, helping to maintain morale both at the front and on the home front. For his fellow airmen, Cosper's actions reinforced the ethic of mutual protection that was essential to their dangerous work. His example reminded them of the values they were fighting for, even as they faced the daily terror of combat missions over hostile territory. For the people of Prince's Risborough, the American pilot's sacrifice created a lasting bond with the United States. Even today, the town remembers Cosper's heroism. A plaque dedicated to his memory was erected outside the Prince's Risborough Library, ensuring that future generations would know of his courage. In Cosper's hometown of Dodge City, Texas, the news of his heroism brought both pride and sorrow. Like thousands of communities across America, this small town had sent its sons to fight in distant lands. Cosper's sacrifice became part of the community's identity, a standard of service to aspire to. His story also illustrates an important but often overlooked aspect of World War II, the role of individual moral choice in the midst of mechanized mass warfare. While the war is often described in terms of massive forces and broad strategies, it was ultimately fought and decided by individuals making choices under extreme pressure. Cosper's choice to remain with his aircraft rather than save himself was not mandated by any military regulation or order. It was a personal decision based on his own moral compass and sense of duty. In making this choice, he demonstrated that even in the most dehumanizing conditions of modern warfare, individual human agency and moral choice remain powerful forces. This aspect of Casper's story connects it to other acts of self-sacrifice during the war, both famous and obscure. From the chaplains who gave up their life jackets on the sinking USAT Dorchester, to the countless instances of soldiers throwing themselves on grenades to save their comrades, these acts of sacrifice reveal the persistent power of human choice, even in the face of overwhelming force. World War II produced many heroes, but what sets Casper's story apart is the clear deliberateness of his sacrifice. Unlike many battlefield acts of heroism, which often occur in the heat of the moment with little time for reflection, Casper had enough time to consider his options. He chose the path that would save others, knowing it would almost certainly cost him his life. This deliberate choice aligns Casper's sacrifice with a tradition of self-sacrifice that transcends cultural and historical boundaries. From ancient times to the present, human societies have recognized and honored those who willingly give their lives so that others might live. What makes these acts so powerful is their affirmation of something essential about humanity. That even in our darkest hours, when the forces of violence and hatred seem overwhelming, individual human beings are capable of acts of extraordinary compassion and selflessness. Casper's story also highlights the particular burden borne by pilots during World War II. Unlike infantry soldiers who could take cover or naval personnel who might abandon ship, pilots of damaged aircraft often faced stark choices with little middle ground. They could bail out and save themselves, potentially allowing their aircraft to crash in populated areas, or they could attempt to guide their failing planes to safer locations, often at great personal risk. Many pilots made the same choice as Casper, staying with their aircraft to avoid civilian casualties. Some survived these emergency landings. Many did not. Their collective actions saved countless lives on the ground and represent an often overlooked aspect of aerial warfare during the conflict. The B-17 itself plays an important role in this story. Designed in the 1930s, the Flying Fortress was built to deliver bombs accurately over long distances while defending itself against enemy fighters. Its design reflected American industrial might and engineering prowess. With 4 1,200-horsepower engines, a typical combat load of 6,000 pounds of bombs, and up to 13 50-caliber machine guns, the B-17 was a formidable weapon system. But it was also home to its crew, who spent hours inside its aluminum skin during missions that could last up to 10 hours. The interior of a B-17 was cramped, noisy, and often bitterly cold. Crewmen wore electrically heated suits to prevent frostbite at high altitudes. They breathed through oxygen masks and communicated via intercom. Each man had a specific position and role: pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, radio operator, flight engineer, and various gunner positions. For Casper, the B-17 was both his command and his responsibility. Pilots developed intimate knowledge of their aircraft's handling characteristics and quirks. They could feel when something was wrong through subtle changes in vibration or sound. This connection helped skilled pilots like Casper extract maximum performance from their aircraft, especially in emergencies. The name Casper gave his B-17, Miriam, after his mother, reflects the personal connection many crews felt with their aircraft. In the uncertain world of combat, these machines became extensions of their crews' identities, painted with names and artwork that reflected their hopes, fears, and connections to home. When his B-17 began to fail on that fateful November day, Casper's extensive training and experience allowed him to keep the aircraft stable long enough for his crew to escape. Without his skill at the controls, none of them might have survived the initial spin that sent the bomber plummeting from the sky. This technical proficiency, combined with moral courage, made Casper's final act possible. He had the skill to temporarily control the damaged aircraft and the courage to use that skill not for his own survival, but for the safety of others. This combination of practical ability and moral purpose exemplifies the best traditions of military service. The story of Clyde "Sparky" Cosper is also a reminder of the human cost of war. Behind every name on a memorial or medal citation is a person with hopes, dreams, and connections to others. Cosper was just 21 years old when he died, a young man with his life ahead of him, now forever frozen in time by his final act of courage. We know from military records that Cosper had enlisted in 1939, served as a gunner in Puerto Rico, and trained as a pilot. But these facts tell us little about the person he was. What were his hobbies? Did he have a sweetheart waiting for him back home? What did he hope to do after the war? These human details are often lost in the broader narratives of conflict. What we do know with certainty is that when faced with a critical decision, Cosper chose to prioritize the lives of others over his own survival. This choice tells us something fundamental about his character and values. It suggests a young man who understood that some principles are worth any sacrifice. For Cosper's mother, Miriam, the loss of her son was a personal tragedy that no medal or recognition could mitigate. Like millions of parents during the war, she received the dreaded notification that her child had been killed in service. Her grief was private, even as her son's sacrifice became part of the public narrative of the war. Cosper's brother, Thomas, continued fighting in the Pacific Theater after learning of Clyde's death. Like many families during World War II, the Cospers gave more than one son to the service, multiplying both their contribution and their risk of loss. Thomas survived the war, carrying his brother's memory with him. In the decades since World War II, the story of Clyde Cosper has been preserved through various memorials and historical accounts. In addition to the plaque in Prince's Risborough, his name is recorded in the American Battle Monuments Commission database and on various veterans' memorials. His remains rest in Dodge City Cemetery in Fannin County, Texas, marked by a headstone that notes his military service and decorations. Each year, on Memorial Day and Veterans Day, his grave, like those of millions of other fallen service members, receives a small American flag, a modest reminder of a life given in service to country. The continued remembrance of Cosper's sacrifice speaks to something enduring in the human experience. Even as the direct witnesses to World War II pass away, the examples of courage and selflessness from that conflict retain their power to inspire and instruct. They remind us of the capacity for nobility that exists alongside humanity's capacity for destruction. Cosper's story also invites us to consider the nature of heroism itself. In an age often characterized by cynicism and self-interest, his straightforward act of self-sacrifice for others stands as a counterpoint, suggesting that idealism and selflessness remain possible even in the most challenging circumstances. Perhaps the most powerful aspect of Cosper's story is its simplicity. There was no audience to impress, no camera to record his actions, no certainty that anyone would ever know the choice he made in those final moments. He acted not for recognition, but from an internal moral compass that pointed toward duty and service to others. This kind of quiet heroism occurred countless times during World War II, often unrecorded and unrecognized. For every Clyde Cosper whose story has been preserved, there are many others whose final acts of courage were witnessed only by those who did not survive to tell the tale. Yet these unheralded sacrifices collectively shaped the outcome of the conflict. They created a moral foundation for the Allied cause that transcended political and strategic considerations. The victory over fascism was achieved not just through superior resources or strategy, but through the accumulated weight of millions of individual choices to serve something greater than self-interest. As we look back on Cosper's sacrifice from the vantage point of the present, we might ask what relevance his story holds for our own time. The specific circumstances of World War II, a global conflict between clearly defined opposing forces, may never recur. But the core elements of Cosper's choice remain eternally relevant. The willingness to put others before self, to make difficult choices based on moral principles rather than self-interest, to use one's skills and position to protect those who cannot protect themselves. These qualities are needed in every generation and every circumstance. They are the building blocks of a just and humane society. In this sense, Cosper's legacy extends far beyond his specific historical context. His example challenges each of us to consider how we might respond when faced with choices between personal safety and the welfare of others. While few will face situations as dramatic as his, all of us encounter moments when our values are tested. For those currently serving in the military, Cosper's example provides a touchstone of the highest traditions of service. His actions embody the core values that military organizations seek to instill: duty, honor, courage, selflessness, and commitment to the welfare of others. For civilians, his story offers a reminder that moral courage is not limited to the battlefield. The same qualities that led Cosper to remain with his aircraft, concern for others, willingness to accept personal risk for a greater good, clarity of purpose under pressure, are needed in many contexts throughout society.
Educating younger generations about examples like Cosper helps to transmit these values across time. When young people learn about such acts of courage and sacrifice, they gain models of behavior that can guide their own choices, even in very different circumstances. This is why memorials, ceremonies of remembrance, and the preservation of stories like Cosper's matter beyond mere historical interest. They provide moral orientation points in a complex world, examples that illuminate possibilities for human behavior at its best. The story of Clyde Sparky Cosper reminds us that in the darkest moments, individual human beings can make choices that affirm life rather than destroy it, that prioritize others rather than self, that build rather than tear down. This is perhaps his most enduring legacy. When faced with a failing aircraft and the choice between his own survival and the protection of others, a 21-year-old pilot from Texas chose the latter.
In doing so, he demonstrated that even in the midst of a war characterized by unprecedented destruction, the human capacity for compassion and sacrifice remained intact. His example echoes across the decades, challenging us to consider our own choices and priorities. While most of us will never pilot a damaged bomber or face immediate life-or-death decisions, all of us have opportunities to put the welfare of others before our own comfort or advantage. In large ways and small, we can choose to embody the same spirit that guided Cosper in his final moments: a commitment to something greater than self, a willingness to accept personal cost for the benefit of others, and the courage to act on principle even when easier options are available. This is the enduring message of Clyde Sparky Cosper's sacrifice. His B-17 may have fallen from the sky over 80 years ago, but the example he set continues to illuminate possibilities for human behavior at its noblest, challenging each generation to rise above self-interest in service to others. In the final analysis, what makes Cosper's story powerful is not just what he did, but what his actions reveal about human potential. In a world that often seems dominated by selfishness, conflict, and cynicism, his example reminds us that these are not the only possibilities for human behavior. Even in the most extreme circumstances, or perhaps especially in such circumstances, human beings are capable of extraordinary moral courage and selflessness. This capacity remains one of our most precious resources, a wellspring of hope in times of darkness. As long as his story is remembered, Clyde Sparky Cosper will continue to serve as he did in life, by showing us the best that we can be, by reminding us of the values worth preserving, and by challenging us to live up to the example he set on a November day high above the English countryside. His legacy is not just in the lives he saved, his crew and the people of Prince's Risborough, but in the moral example he provided for generations to come. Through his sacrifice, a young pilot from Texas achieved a kind of immortality that transcends the brief span of his 21 years of life. In the annals of human courage, his name deserves to be remembered alongside the greatest heroes of any age. For in those final moments, as he guided his failing aircraft away from innocent lives below, Clyde Sparky Cosper embodied the highest aspirations of the human spirit.